In the final nights of our recent summer holiday, I've been away for the last 3 weeks, so if I haven't met you, I've seen some new faces, which is amazing. It's great to have you here. We just finished up a few weeks of summer holiday, and Natalie and I wrapped up the Netflix series, The Four Seasons. Now, if you haven't seen it, but you want to, here's your fair warning that this sermon contains very mild spoilers, not much beyond what you'll get from reading a description of the show. And I will assume that if you flee the room right now, it's just because you want to maintain the surprise. It's okay. So The Four Seasons is this show, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a show about a trio of married friends who are all deep into middle age, which I felt as a personal attack. There's Nick and Anne, Danny and Claude, and Kate and Jack. And they have known each other for decades and have maintained a tradition of meeting up regularly throughout the year, each season, hence the title, for a trip together. In the first episode, as the friends gather to celebrate Nick and Anne's anniversary, Nick drops the bombshell that he's planning to leave his wife of 25 years. And the rest of the series explores the fallout from that decision. Alongside Nick and Anne, we've got Danny and Claude, a married gay couple in what seems to be a flexibly open relationship, and they're dealing with Danny's health issues and Claude's overprotectiveness. And finally, there's Kate and Jack, who are traditionally normative, monogamous, and happy to a point. They're also struggling in their own way to avoid the split that is about to befall their friends. The show is funny and clever. But what it makes it hit a little different than the typical rom-com, I think, is the way that it juxtaposes different kinds of love and ways of loving without ever adjudicating or answering the question of what love ought to look like. Instead, it just portrays these different kinds of loves and different kinds of lovers and treats them with compassion as they are in all their complexity. I glanced at some online articles about the show, and this refusal to evaluate the characters seems to have annoyed some reviewers. They wanted the plot to reward the characters they liked and punish the ones that they didn't like. Like Nick and Anne's failed marriage could have been conscripted into any number of moralistic fables. The shows are populated with this. The lowest hanging fruit would have been to punish Nick for his abandoning Anne after so many years and immediately dating a woman 2 decades his junior. Because after all, midlife crises are inherently pathetic in narrative. And the other direction, the show could have celebrated Nick's decision if it wanted to, a quest for authenticity and freedom, no matter the cost. But this would have been narratively easier and more familiar if it was the story of a stifled wife leaving a husband. But love, like life, is messier than any morality tale, as anyone who has ever loved knows. And the show plays that out. Nick has to confront the damage he's done and the pain that he's caused, both to Anne and to Lila, their daughter. But the joy and vitality he experiences with his new, painfully younger girlfriend, Ginny, is real as well. At the same time, Anne is devastated and furious with Nick for leaving her. But once the painful truth has come out, would she have wanted a husband who stuck with her out of obligation alone, who still loved her but wasn't in love with her anymore? Doesn't she, facing the precipitous social erasure of the peri- and postmenopausal woman, deserve better than a partner whose staying in the marriage amounts to little more than the soldier's gritted teeth virtue of refusing to abandon his post? These are the kind of questions that the show asks. Now, as a viewer, I have my own evaluations of the characters and their relationships, but I'm not their priest, and the characters clearly aren't Christians. So there's not much to be gained by watching a show and holding them to moral codes and theologies that none of them ever agreed to in the first place. It's far more compassionate and far more interesting, I think, simply to meet them where they are and see them for who they are. Couples trying to navigate life in all its complexity and finitude together. And what they show in the process is what we're talking about tonight, which is love, and specifically the temptations that can come into play to make love into an idol. We're at the midpoint of our summer teaching series called Idols Among Us, where we're looking at the idols of our culture that beckon for our worship. And the premise of this series is that human beings are naturally inclined toward idolatry, to treat things that aren't God with the reverence that's due to God alone. And the reason that we do this, the premise of the series, is that we do this to manage our spiritual, existential anxiety over forces that are beyond our control. We live in a world where we are subject to forces beyond our control, and we have a tendency to grab for stability by making spiritual bargains with lesser deities, idols, who we wrongly imagine can give us security in a life that we can't control. But unlike our ancestors, whose idols were actual idols, like statues, our 21st century idols tend to be invisible. They're conceptual. So far in the series, we've dealt with comfort, success, and religious pluralism. And if you, like me, you've been away for the last few weeks, you can catch up with that on YouTube, like I did, with Jenny and Susie and Nathan's excellent sermons on these topics over the past weeks. The fundamental problem of all idols, as Susie suggested a couple weeks back, a more contemporary terminology might be attachments. The fundamental problem with all idols is that to manage our anxieties, we give and offer ourselves, that we make sacrifices to things that don't deserve us. You were created to know and belong to no one less than the God who gave you life, which makes every idol just a spiritual poser, pulling your attention and distracting your gaze from the one you were made for. So all idolatry represents the urgency of your fears driving out the importance of your relationship with God. And what we're going to be saying every week is that the appropriate response to invisible idols in our time is to reveal what they are. Has to be true, because they all start with the same letter. That's a rule. Reveal what they are, seek release from them, and refocus on God. So how do we apply this framework for this week's idol? Love. How does love even become an idol anyway? Isn't love a good thing? Spoiler, yes, unless it's not. How do we reveal where love might be an idol in our lives? And let me acknowledge I was caught completely flat-footed in the pre-service prayer gathering when the first two couples that walked in had just gotten engaged, both of them, and someone else who I haven't seen in a little while came in and is newly married. I don't know. I don't want to share anybody's news for them, but these people are in the room right now. Anyway, they're like, all of this. And I'm like, great, tonight's about the idolatry of love. Good. Okay. So, you all are in the clear. When your idols aren't physical objects promising very specific things, like healthy crops or rain or fertility, you've got to figure out where you're making your spiritual bargains to assuage your spiritual anxieties. And so the question for us then is, how does love fit in here? Namely, what anxieties are we looking to solve by sacrificing to the idol of love? And in the Four Seasons, no character helps us understand this quite like Nick, the marriage breaker. And I want to look at him for a minute, and I hope this will be graspable even if you haven't watched the show. At a surface level, Nick is a cliche. He is a successful older businessman. He gets bored of the wife of his youth. He leaves her for a younger woman. But in Steve Carell's beautiful and poignant portrayal of him, this could-be cliche takes on an existential depth. Nick has realized that he and Anne are just going through the motions. It's not that he dislikes Anne or doesn't care about her, but after a quarter century of marriage, Nick, as a husband, has become little more than an actor playing his role in a script. He has stopped being present to his existence. And with a middle-aged awareness of life's finitude, of having less time in front of him than behind, he doesn't want to waste his remaining years, as he sees it, being alive, but not really living. And fairly or not, he sees Anne, the love of his youth, as an immutable obstacle to the kind of life that he wants. In Nick's eyes, an alive life, a life where he's really living, requires a new love. Now, in the months after he leaves Anne, he dives into life with a renewed, and it has to be admitted, deeply financially privileged passion alongside his new girlfriend, Ginny. And while the show knows that it's a bit ridiculous that this 50-something is now heading to Burning Man, it also makes clear that he's loving every minute of it. He's silly, yes, but he's undeniably happy. Now that's an explanation of Nick's actions. It's not an excuse for them. At the end of the day, he blows up his family for selfish reasons. We don't have to celebrate or extol what he does, but you can learn from people whose behavior you don't endorse. And if we can withhold judgment enough to look at him with compassion and generosity, I suspect we can see something that we all identify with at least a little bit. Some fears that we can empathize with no matter our age or stage of life. Because what Nick is really terrified of is not living his life. He's terrified of simply standing on the moving walkway of time until his inevitable death. He doesn't just want to play a role, and I think that's something that we can all empathize with. So what's this have to do with love? And how do Nick's fears help us reveal the potential idolatry of love? Well, in Nick, we see the intrinsically ecstatic character of all love. He shows us the ecstatic character of all love. And I'm aware it's not immediately clear what I'm saying. Bear with me. When we hear ecstatic in our modern usage, we tend to think about physical pleasure. But the word ecstasy comes from a Greek compound word, ekstasis. That literally means to stand outside, to be placed outside. Ek, out, stasis, to place or stand. So normal life is just standing where you are, but ecstasy, whether physical or emotional or spiritual, is the experience of standing outside yourself. And I suspect we've all at one point or another wondered, is there more to life than this, whatever your life might be? The experience of ecstasy is an answer. Ecstasy says yes, because it takes you out of your normal little self. And if we think about ecstasy this way, we can understand why all love is fundamentally ecstatic in its orientation, even if it doesn't always feel good. Because when you love someone, when you love anyone or anything, it's to put yourself into the beloved. It's to take part of you and put it into the thing or the person that you love. Love takes us outside of ourselves, necessarily so, always. And the more we love, the more of us it takes and puts us in someone or something else. This is true of any kind of love. It can be erotic, familial, it can be friendship, it can be charity. I remember when our eldest daughter, who was then a toddler, ran ahead of me down the sidewalk for the first time. And I remember thinking it felt like my heart had jumped out of my chest and sprouted legs and sprinted down the street. Love doesn't necessarily bring ecstasy in the sense of pleasure, but all love is ecstatic because it takes us outside of ourselves. And I believe everyone in here has loved, and so you know what this feeling is, to be pulled out of yourself. We don't have to endorse Nick's actions to empathize with his ecstatic longings, which are deeply human, to break free of the normal everyday and be called out of ourselves into something greater, just something else. It's a fundamental human impulse, and it's what love offers. And it helps us understand how love can readily become an idol because we are willing to pay a really high price for that experience. And here, as always, idols are eminently predictable and boring. Because love's ecstasy is good, but becomes an idol when we try to empty ourselves, when we try to go out of ourselves into something that can't contain us. Love becomes an idol when we try to put ourselves into something that can't contain us. Often the love we seek is related to physical desires and pleasures because they're so immediate and self-authenticating. But other kinds of loves can just as easily become an idol. Love of a friend or philanthropic love, certainly love of children. Love becomes an idol when we pour more of ourselves into the beloved than the beloved can contain, because not all loves are equally sized. Our dearest loves, our friends, our family, they can hold a lot of us, but nobody can hold all of us. Love is revealed as an idol in our lives when we seek to empty the infinite fullness of our souls into the finite vessels of created things, like a garden hose emptying into a shot glass. I wonder if that brings any relationships to mind for you. Any relationships where you've given or are giving more of yourself away than the other person can hold. Because nobody, not a spouse, not a friend, not a child, can ever hold the fullness of who you are. There's no one on this earth that can ever hold the fullness of who you are, no matter what you think about soulmates. And the movement here is reveal, release, and restore. So if we've revealed or tried to reveal when and how love is an idol, pouring a gallon bottle into a pint glass, how do we find release from that? Well, the Bible passage we heard is from Jesus' final teaching to his disciples, his students, on the night before he was crucified. And in this section of the teaching, he tells his disciples that they are his friends if they do what he commands. And here's the movement. He says, "No longer do I call you servants," Jesus says, "because the servant doesn't know what the master's doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I've heard from my Father I've made known to you." The difference between the servant and the friend isn't how they act. They both do the same thing. Both the servant and the friend do what Jesus tells them to do. They live the way that Jesus says to live. The difference between them is that the servant doesn't know why she does what she does, but the friend gets it. The friend understands. My kids are inclined to tell me, because isn't a reason, but for servants, because is a reason. The kids eventually grow up, and if you're lucky, they become friends, and friends understand. Live this way, Jesus is saying, because it lines up with the will of a God who is love. Don't just be a hired hand doing as you're told. Join in the mission, share in the work, live the life because you believe in it. Friends understand why you do what you do and the way you live, why you live how you live. Friends want to live the same way because they share the same values. And what's the value that Jesus is teaching? It's a particular kind of love. This is my commandment, Jesus says. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. As I have loved you, he's speaking a bit prophetically here because his fate is sealed. Love one another as I have loved you with the greatest love, which is to lay down your life for your friends. It's the ecstasy, the standing outside of oneself, the self-emptying of self-sacrifice, of self-offering, of seeing in your friend, whether that person is a spouse or partner or lover or buddy or child, whoever, someone worth giving everything for. And this might sound a lot like idolatry, like love is idolatry, pouring yourself completely into the beloved, becoming, as it were, your identity as spouse, parent, child, friend. But the difference in the love that Jesus is describing is that it's not about picking your nearest and dearest and loving them specifically. Jesus' love is a promiscuous and indiscriminate self-giving that doesn't select between people you like and don't. You crave the ecstasy of love, of standing outside of yourself, of desiring and loving a person with everything you are and have. Jesus invites you into the ecstasy of his love, which is God's love for the entire world. Love one another as I have loved you, Jesus says. I call you friends, not servants, because you understand why I'm asking this. It's not about finding your identity in your beloved, no matter who they may be. It's about the lived reality of treating every single person the way that God sees them, which is a person of infinite worth. So you're not pouring your love into another person. You're pouring your love through people into God. You're pouring your love through others into God. Is it glamorous? Not usually. Is it always or often pleasurable in a conventional sense? No. But by loving like Jesus, by laying down our lives, whether in big or small ways, we participate in a love that's beyond our imagining. And we can be released from the smallness of our finite desires, the loves that we're inclined to give ourselves over to far more than we should. The final movement of dealing with idols is refocusing our vision on God, turning our eyes from the idols that tempt us to the God who saves us. Refocusing from the idol of love doesn't mean loving less. Our problem, none of our problems here, is that we love too much. It's that we don't love the right thing enough. We need to love more. And what I think is required here for that is a full accounting of what Jesus means when he says, love one another as I have loved you, which is to say, love one another just like the way I'm going to die for you. Jesus' death on the cross was undeniably horrific, a torturous and public humiliation. It's precisely Jesus' willingness to be physically debased, St. Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, which demonstrates the height of his obedience. His voluntary submission to bodily violation was essential, not accidental to the character of his love. And the love of the cross is no anemic exercise of duty. Jesus on the cross is not some husband staying in the marriage out of obligation. The hands nailed to the cross constituted an ecstasy that embraced the entirety of humanity and creation. In Jesus' death, we see God evacuating himself of divine glory for the sake of the beloved, which is you. It's you. If you've sacrificed yourself to the idol of love with its petty passions, you will find restoration in contemplating the true love of the cross, in seeing your beloved, and you have the right to call him that because he first said it to you, and seeing your beloved splayed and transgressed and trespassed, and knowing it is all for you. The great mystics of the Christian tradition have always recognized the cross as a kind of eroticism that encompasses but transcends sexuality. It's a bodily self-giving that goes far beyond the physicality of pleasure and pain, and we're invited weekly to consume it, to feast on his sacrifice, drinking his blood and eating his flesh. If we're not shocked by it, it's only because it's become so familiar. Putting trembling mouths to the cross and taste. If God hadn't offered this, we never would have dared to imagine that this could have been how God loves us. But God the Father elected to make the profanity of his Son's death the doorway to our holiness. The cross is an invitation to desire, far more than the kind of milquetoast faith, honestly, that I think we're often way too contented with. Look at me, God says. I'm putting myself on display for you. Look at me hanging there, stripped, gashed, violated, bruised, pierced. This is how much I want you. St. Teresa of Avila, the 16th century Spanish mystic, had a famous encounter with God that was artistically immortalized by the artist Gian Lorenzo Bernini. St. Teresa writes, "I saw in the angel's hand a long spear of gold, and at the iron's point there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to me to be thrusting it at all times into my heart and to pierce my very entrails, and when he drew it out, he seemed to draw them out also and to leave me all on fire with a great love of God. The pain was so great that it made me moan, and yet so surpassing was the sweetness of this excessive pain that I could not wish to be rid of it. The soul is satisfied now with nothing less than God. The pain is not bodily but spiritual, though the body has its share in it. It is a caressing of love so sweet, which now takes place between the soul and God, that I pray God of his goodness to make him experience it, who may think that I am lying. I pray God of his goodness to make him experience it, who may think that I am lying. May God of his goodness let each of us experience it, destroying all the idols of love with the fire of God's love, because this is the end of our familiar scripts of simply playing our parts and filling our roles and standing on the moving walkway of time until our demise. God invites us into a sweet ecstasy of blood and sweat and tears and thorns. This is the kind of love you were made to feel. It's the kind of love you were built to pursue. Don't be content with any lesser passions. They don't deserve the end of you, but Jesus does and will receive you. May God bless you with the experience of his love. Amen.